welcome to a slightly different video format than I think we're all used to from my channel. First things first, it's going to be a little bit more of a rant, so if you don't like that, it's okay if you click away from this video. Second thing is we need to create a good idea and frame a good job of what we're going to talk about. With it being an unusual video, you're not going to see any fishing. You're not going to see, any catches that I do or any releases. We are purely going to be having a very simple, informative / discussion, because if you have questions, I want you to throw those in the comments and then I will answer them later on. But now let's do the framing. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, today we're going to be talking about LiveScope. I know, this thing, it's caused so much controversy in the fishing world, it's not even funny. Is using it cheating? Is it ethical to use it when we're keeping fish? Is it ethical to use when we're targeting deep fish? All these questions, we will get into that. But first I want to talk about what the frame of what we're looking at. So what am I? I am a recreational fisherman. I fish quite frequently, both on open water and across the ice. I'm not a professional angler by any means. My dog is over here looking outside. We're having a storm right now. So if we see any, lightning or thunder or the dog goes running across and creates all sorts of chaos, don't worry, everything is fine. Anyway, back to me. I'm a very recreational angler, but I would say I'm a serious recreational angler, and that's why I purchased LiveScope. And I've now used LiveScope or forward-facing sonar for 5 years. So I have a pretty good background in it. I can speak pretty intelligently about its capabilities and what it is not as well. I thought he was going to knock you over. I don't know if you can see him. Anyway, so that is the frame of our argument. I got interrupted a couple times, so let me just make it clear. Recreational fishermen, heavy use, open water and ice fishing. Oh, and the other thing is I'm also a multi-state angler. So I've fished across many states across the Midwest, and I'm fairly competent in, the limits that they have, especially on the species that I am targeting. Okay, let's get into the argument. The first question that always comes up: does LiveScope help you catch more fish? I can resound, or forward-facing sonar, will be fair to Garmin. I can honestly say yes, and not only just a yes, absolutely yes. So let's talk about that briefly. What capabilities do you gain over a traditional sonar unit such as a Vex or a Markham or any of the lower end helixes? Well, the first thing it does is it gives you accurate map data. I think Helix 5 or 6 you start getting into being able to mapping, so that's why I said the lower ends. So the Helix, the Hummingbird 35, 45, and 55, your Markham series, and your Vexilars. None of those have the capability of mapping. So from the get-go, you're at a disadvantage because you're either pulling up the maps on your phone or you're having to do it from your noggin. And on some pretty big bodies of water, even 20 or 30 feet can make a difference, both open water and closed water, of where you're targeting. So keep that in mind. You do gain quite a bit of visibility of the overall lake when you are introducing GPS mapping, because you show where you are and you have the topography of the lake. So that's the first reason. The second reason is the reason that everybody talks about, or the forward scanning mode, because now what that allows you to do on the open water, so now you can immediately pan across an area, whether you're in forward or perspective mode. That's my denotation of it. Anyway, so it gives you the immediate confirmation of if there is fish and allows you to keep better track of your lure. So for example, I cast out towards you guys 45 feet away. I see my lure hit the water, but I'm bringing it back in, coming through the column, and all of a sudden I start seeing a fish chase it. Previously in that life, if I'm fishing any depth of water, 15, 20 feet, whatever, I would have to go purely by feel. I could side scan out and mark and say, okay, there's a waypoint over there, there's structure, and we're gonna drive by the boat with the boat again on that structure point, and then we're gonna hit spot lock and we're gonna cast to that structure point. Now, not only can I do all those same things, but now I can actively see my bait and interact with that fish. Oh, you know, he came off and he followed it, but that wasn't the right thing. Maybe I need to go up a size. Maybe I need to go down a size. And then you can, like I said, you can interact with that fish to whatever level. Some people will sit there and watch a fish for minutes trying to catch him on LiveScope. Other people say, hey, he didn't want to bite the first 2 times I drug it past his face. That's okay. So that's on the open water. On the closed water, or ice fishing, as all of us northerners call it, is similar in a way, but you can pan out across. You can find structure that way very easily rather than drilling out holes, so you're far more efficient that way. And secondarily to that, then you can also do the same thing, but you can confirm there's fish. So drop the deucer down the hole, make a big arc, scan out 120, 130 feet. Oh, there's a pot of fish 50 yards that way, and there's a pot of fish 50 yards that way. Okay, I don't have to grid out that whole area anymore. I drill a hole 50 yards that way, have my buddy run over there, drop a deucer down. He's right on top of him. Have another buddy run out that way, 50 yards, drop a deucer down. Now we're on 2 schools of fish, and we only had to drill 4 or 5 holes. You are going to catch more fish that way. And thirdly, the third mode is down mode. And in down mode, I think it is a far better solution than the flashers. When I used to fish with an A-scope, along with the live imaging, I felt that was a really good compromise too, because there is a slight delay in the live imaging, but not a huge delay. Hi, Buck, how we doing? My dog's sitting right here. You can't see him, he's slightly off screen now, but he's looking at me, really cute. Anyway, back to the topic at hand after the ADD break. What you have happen is there is a slight delay, and you have the option for an A-scope right there in the Garmin ones anyway, and that kind of helps you with the compromise, especially on really finicky bites. I'm to the point right now where I don't fish with the A-scope anymore, and I just fish with the down mode, and that does an amazing amount of things for you. Firstly, it gives you an amazing idea of how big that fish is. Is it a long, skinny fish? Is it a short, fat fish? Is it something that, looks more like a muskie or a northern pike or a walleye, or is it more crappie or bluegill shaped? These are all things that you can tell with LiveScope. So if you're not targeting muskie and you see a large bass come up, I don't want to catch a large bass, you pull your bait away from him and he goes on with his life and you go back to jigging. Or if you're like, I just want to catch any fish that swims by, great. Now you can target them immediately right to the level that they want. And there are a couple different strategies that you can do with them too, is you can really watch the fish behavior on down imaging. So you put it down to them, also in forward mode, but you put it down to them and you're jigging them and they like it when it falls. Okay, well, now you can really keep track of keeping your bait just below their nose, and so that they want to engage with it. And then, you bring it back up past them and they shoot up past it and they bite, right? So that's something that you can really key in on LiveScope. The second thing that you can do is you can get really targeted when you're fishing structure. So you can get right on top of a structure and actually sit in between branches, because you go, okay, I'm going to take a shot on this brush pile this way and this way. And what that's going to tell me is that's going to tell me the highest point in this dimension and the highest point in this dimension. And then I can come 3 or 4 feet off of it on each side, and I can fish the whole brush pile top to bottom and be less worried. You still have to worry, of course, because there's structure there, but be less worried about losing hooks and jigs, and you can present it right to where those fish are sitting. So I think framing that out, that is where people say there is an ethical issue, or there can be an argument made to why LiveScope is an unethical tool. Do I think that? Well, I have it right here. I use it, and I've been using it for 5 years. So what I think we as anglers and owners of LiveScope need to really start doing is we really need to start looking at how and when we are keeping fish. Let me phrase this next point. I am not a biologist. I'm not a necropsy expert. So I'm not going to give you any definitives on this is the way you need to fish, or this is how we absolutely need to go about this problem. I'm going to give you my opinion on and the strategies that I have used and the experience that I have and what has been working for me. It might not work for you, it might not work for everybody, and it certainly isn't scientifically proven, but the data that I have is showing that this is how we need to operate, or how I need to operate, excuse me, not how you need to operate, how I need to operate in order to keep some of the rights that we have. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about how many fish we can keep per day. Something that's been thrown around in several states, it actually is occurring in several states, is reduction in fish limits. Why is that? It's because we as anglers are very, very, very well equipped. When I go out on the summer in my boat and I go around and I mark structure, I can break down a 1,000 acre lake in approximately a day and a half of fishing. That's not really a whole lot of fishing there. That's more just marking stuff out, but I can do that. So at that point, I now have every point of structure in the whole entire lake marked. What does that do? Well, that makes the next time that I go out fishing much easier, because I can refer back to each and every one of those little points and I can catch fish off of every single one of those. And from there, what do? You catch a lot more fish. So I'm going to pick on Minnesota. I've fished a lot in Minnesota, loved the state, and they have really, really great opportunities. What are you seeing in Minnesota? Lake Mille Lacs. I'm not totally up to date on Lake Mille Lacs, but for 1 or 2 years there in the past 5 years, it was a catch and release only on walleye. Catch and release only on a lake that's like 8 miles by 8 miles across. So their population of fish was so low that they said, you cannot keep any fish off this lake. That's huge. Additionally, in Minnesota, you see a lot of the panfish initiatives. Sorry about that. You see a lot of the panfish initiatives. What are the panfish initiatives? The panfish initiatives are they take their overall state limit and they say those do not apply on this particular lake. So for example, my overall state limit of bluegill for Minnesota is 20 fish. If I go to Lake A, and Lake A is one of these restricted fisheries, it can have a limit of 5 bluegill, 10 bluegill, 15 bluegill, or in some cases, 0 keeping fish. So once again, what they're doing is they're doing their creel studies and they're saying, hey, we're not seeing any adult fish in this, and we're seeing a rather low population. So a low population plus no adult fish or no large fish says that we have an issue with over-harvesting, right? So what do? They say, we're going to reduce limits. Okay. Obviously, we took too many fish out of the water, and now we've got to let that lake come back 5, 10, 15 years to build up that population. And that's why they're doing those reduced limits. Goes back to the root cause. Why are they doing the reduced limits? It's because we are so well equipped, we are so well equipped that we have taken too many fish out because we can go and mark those things. So it's not necessarily a technology problem, it's an us problem. So what have I done? My strategy. First part of my strategy is I set a limit on myself of how many fish I can keep. It's just me eating fish, and if you really want to eat good fish, you're going to eat fresh fish. So I've got, let's take Minnesota, for example. Got a limit of 20 bluegill and 10 crappie on a statewide. Am I going to go ahead and pick 20 bluegill and 10 crappie on a day? No. Why? Because I can't eat 20 bluegill and 10 crappie in 2 meals. I can probably eat 5 to 7 crappie and probably, 8 to 10 bluegills, one or the other. So if I catch a mixed bag, I'm keeping 7 gills and 2 crappie, or I'm keeping 5 gills and 3 crappie, or whatever. I'm going to limit myself because I like eating fish, but I also really like eating fresh fish. On that same note, people always ask, why does fish smell when you cook it? It's because you're not eating fresh fish. You're eating fish that's been in the refrigerator or freezer, especially the refrigerator, for 4 or 5 days. And guess what fish does when it's out of water? It rots. So if you have fish that's 4 or 5 days old, it's going to smell up the house pretty good. And that's because it's basically rotted. Same difference when it's in the freezer, not to the same degree if you've sealed it and all that sort of good stuff. But back to my point, I like eating fresh fish. So I'm going to keep less than my limit and what I can eat for a day or two. And then once I'm out of fish, okay, now I can go back. What that has done is that has allowed me to do many days of catch and release before I keep, a big bunch of them or whatever if I'm trying to do a fish fry. So that's first strategy. Second strategy is incredibly controversial. And this is where, once again, I remind you that I am not a wildlife biologist. I'm not a necropsy expert. And don't worry, I will admit there is some bias, but I also have counterpoints. So pay attention. I have stopped fishing in over 25 feet of water. Why have I done that? I don't know if it is what people call barotrauma or if it is purely exhaustion of length of time that you are fighting a fish. Okay, let's break this down just a bit. Not an expert on barotrauma. Some people say it exists, some people say it doesn't exist. What I do know is the more that you exhaust a fish, the more likely it is going to die. If I pull a bluegill out of 10 foot of water, it goes from 0 to 10, right? If I pull a bluegill out of 40 foot of water, it goes from 0 to 40. So it's got to fight me for 40 feet. If the fish is fighting for its life and we're assuming a linear curve, it has to fight me for 4 times longer, and that's 4 times more of an exhausting fight for it. The likelihood that it is going to be completely exhausted and unable to go back to the water is 4 times higher than if I pulled it out of 10 foot of water. Okay, now, is that barotrauma or is that something else? I don't know. Oh, it's okay. But what I do know is that when I pull, or when I have pulled more fish out of 40 foot of water, a lot more of them die. Counterpoint, Matt, show bias. I had probably a dozen fish that I pulled out of 15 foot of water or less that also died, that were unable to be released from the water. So this is not a foolproof solution. Why does that matter to admit that? Well, that is part of why, fits into point 1. I'm not keeping fish all the time, and I'm certainly not going to go out there and try and keep my total limit, because if I go out there and I say, I'm going to go, catch a bunch of fish today, oh crap, I killed 2 or 3. That's what I have my limit for, right? Is I go, oh crap, I can't return this into the water. He's belly up in the fishbowl. Looks like I toss him in the pail and he's coming home with me, right? So that is the second part of that strategy. And don't worry, I'm admitting bias that I think that barotrauma is a thing, but I don't have the degree or the study to be able to do that. What I am noticing though is the longer that I fight the fish and the longer that I keep it out of the water, in addition to a longer fight, the much higher likelihood it is going to die. Now, am I telling you that you should follow these same rules? No, this is my data. You guys will have different data points and different viewpoints on this. The third part of it is, if I do go fish in 30 foot of water or 35 or 40 foot of water, what am I doing? What's my strategy? Well, my strategy is I'm keeping 4 or 5 fish. Whatever comes out of the water goes into the pail, because it doesn't have nearly the likelihood that it will be able to be returned to the water, whether that's from exhaustion or barotrauma, or if that's the same thing. Once again, not a wildlife biologist. These are just the things that I'm observing. But back to my main counterpoint to that, because I admit bias, is I have had fish die in 15 foot of water. So what do? That's why you don't have a full limit. And you say, well, this one can't be returned to the water. Looks like it's coming home in the pail with me. And that is where I think we get mixed up with why LiveScope is, or some people think that LiveScope isn't ethical, is because it does allow you to target fish in unique environments that we haven't previously been able to, such as heavy brush piles and dense brush piles, and then also those deep water points that used to be really considered safe zones in lakes that don't seem to be that way anymore for whatever reason. So I know this probably sounded very ranty and very preachy. I don't mean it to. I'm not telling you this is what you need to do. This is telling you these are my experiences, and this is how I am approaching the problem that I see. Because what I don't want to see is I don't want to see my actions and what I am doing to a public resource limit everyone, right? Why I understand, I'll use Minnesota as an example again. They are doing the right thing. They are trying to preserve their fisheries so that people down the road can enjoy them, because we have taken too much out of the resource. So what I am trying to do is say, let's keep our limits and our rights where they're at right now and do our best so that in 5 and 10 years, we can say, hey, we all made the right choice. We all ate a few less fish this winter, but we all still had our wonderful fish fries and, that sort of thing. And in 10 years, that fishery has now rebounded, and then we're back into the good old days of I could go out around any point in Minnesota and I could cast out my line and I could pull out a 10-inch bluegill and a 16-inch crappie. And, now those fish are more and more mythical every single day. And now when someone posts one on and it's 16-inch crappie, people are like, I've never even seen a crappie that big in my entire life. So that is where I am coming from on this, is everyone talks about those old glory days. So what are we doing right now to get us back to the glory days in 5 or 10 years? And that is, like I said, picking on Minnesota because I have a lot of experience there. And I think it's a short-term sacrifice for hopefully a much longer term gain. And that's what we need to say too, is it's the same thing, right? If I am always keeping my full limit of fish, regardless of whatever they're at, then at some point, and everybody else uses the same strategy as me, at some point, there will be a time when we go to that lake and the fishing isn't as good. There aren't as many fish. There aren't as big of fish. And then we all go, well, I remember this day, back on, this lake 5 years ago, 10 years ago, tons of huge fish. Now we're lucky to see 1 or 2 huge fish a season. So, not ranting at you guys. I'm just giving you my experiences. Do what you will with them. If you like my strategies, phenomenal. Adopt them. If you don't like them, go ahead and tell me why you don't like them and what your experience is different. Because guess what? I don't fish in your area most likely. I also don't have all the same experiences that you do. If you have experiences that say, hey, we've been pulling fish out of 45 foot of water and they're fine. They go right back. We watch them on the LiveScope and they go back down. Perfect. I want to hear about it, because guess what? I'm not a scientist or biologist. I'm just a guy who likes catching fish, and I want to keep my fishing limits at where they're at right now so that I can go to the lake and have a great time, and you can go to that same lake and have an awesome, great time as well. And none of us have to say, well, where are the glory days, right? Can we get back to glory days? I want us to be in a fishing spot where we say, we are in the glory days. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you appreciated this video. Go ahead and like it, subscribe if you want to see other fishing and outdoors content. We're going to be kicking off the spring season here, so we're going to go from closed water season to open water season, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you for your time.